Good evening. Wow, not much light in here tonight, is there? I'd have to come up with a couple more lights. I don't know. Hope everyone is doing well. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. I wear the Tathagata's teaching, freeing all creations. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. All evil karma ever committed by me since of old, on account of my beginningless greed, anger, and ignorance, born of my body, mouth, and thought, now I atone for it all. The fragrance of this incense invites the awakened mind to be present with us now. The fragrance of this incense fills our room, protects and guards our minds from wrong thinking. The fragrance of this incense unites us with precepts, concentration, and insight. We offer it for all beings. Homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I shall become one with the Buddha. I resolve that I shall each day follow the way of life he laid down for us to walk and awaken to his supreme wisdom. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I shall become one with the Dharma. The gates of Dharma are manifold. I vow to enter them all. The goal of wisdom is ever beyond. I shall attain it. I go to the Sangha for guidance. I shall become one with the Sangha in the spirit of universal fellowship, and as a member of the Sangha, I pledge myself to strive for the enlightenment of all beings. The Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud and demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with the boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upward to the skies and downward to the depths, outward and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, sitting or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being free from all sense desires, is not born again into the world of suffering. Metta prayer. May I be happy and well. May no harm come to me. May I learn compassion. May all my friends, family, and those I love be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those troubled in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those who have hurt me in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all those I have hurt in body, mind, and spirit be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all my enemies be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. May all living beings be happy and well. May no harm come to them. May they learn compassion. We'll meditate and then we'll do the combined dedication. And then there'll be a Dharma talk. As always, take a few deep breaths, get your attention centered on your breath. Aware when you're breathing in, aware when you're breathing out. And then just let your breath settle comfortably. And recollecting the Buddha, the virtues of the Buddha are wisdom, compassion, and purity. Purity meaning the pure mind, the mind that doesn't cling. Compassion meaning wishing oneself and others, all others, to be free from suffering. And wisdom meaning be aware of what leads to suffering and stress, and aware of what leads to happiness and peace, and committing to abandon that which leads to stress and sorrow, and cultivate that which leads to happiness and peace. And take a moment just to contemplate that. Goodwill leads to happiness and peace. So we'll develop that. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from animosity. May all beings be free from stress and affliction. May all beings look after themselves with ease. Clinging to the self, to the importance of the ego, leads to unhappiness, to stress, to sorrow. Releasing that idea, recognizing the self as ephemeral, as an illusion, leads to happiness and freedom. And we can do that through mindfulness of the body. So you can just scan the body, head hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin. Surrounding a bunch of parts that you really don't identify as you. And staying with the breath, just scan the body any way you'd like to do that. From the top of the head to the soles of the feet, enveloped by the skin. And recognizing that life is ephemeral, impermanent, encourages us to work harder, to let go of that which leads to stress, and develop that which leads to peace and happiness, not just for ourselves, but for our world, for all beings. Life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes by and opportunity is lost. Each of us must strive to awaken. Do not squander this life. And we'll take about 5 minutes and just meditate on the breath. The tip of the nose or the belly or the heart. And note each breath, Budo, or count each breath. Breathing in, count. Breathing out, counting 1 up to 10, and then start over. Each breath. If you miss one, you can't go back and count it. Count each breath. You can sharpen your attention on the breath, just noticing each breath carefully, the beginning of the in breath to the end, the beginning of the out breath to the end. Connecting each breath. The end of one is the beginning of the next. Strung continuously together like beads on a mala. The bell will ring twice to end the meditation. Take your time, take a breath. Be where you are, aware of your surroundings. No rush to open your eyes. Just when you're ready. Go ahead and do the dedication now. Buddha nature pervades the whole universe, existing right here now, and offering candles and incense, reciting the Dharma and training the mind, great merit is attained. We dedicate this merit to the great Master Shakyamuni Buddha, the all-pervading and everlasting three treasures, to the 16 guardians and all protectors of the Dharma, their relations throughout space and time, to all ancestors of this Sangha and all beings in the Dharma world. May penetrating light dispel the darkness of ignorance, that all karma be resolved in the mind flower bloom and eternal spring. May the Dharma body maintain strength and health, and years of life be lengthened for all teachers of this Sangha. May their vows be fully realized. May they live in perfect peace with Buddha Dharma. We pray for those suffering from violence and those who grieve for them, for those living in oppression, for all who are imprisoned who should be free, for all refugees from violence, hunger, and catastrophes, man-made or natural. We pray for the health and well-being of those suffering from diseases of body, mind, or spirit, and those working toward the healing of those afflictions. We especially pray for those suffering from COVID-19, those working to protect and treat them, those grieving for those lost to this pandemic. May they all be serene through our troubles, and may we realize the enlightened way together. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Mahaprajna, Paramita. You know, Nina, the thing about these YouTube meetings is that if you didn't tell us you were late, we wouldn't have known. We're just glad you made it. And I was just kidding, but it's true. I don't know who's here until somebody says something. So it actually makes me really happy to move up here to the computer where I can see things and see how people saying hello to each other and all that kind of stuff. I like that. So, yeah. I guess you want me to give a Dharma talk. I can do that. While I'm talking, let me know if there's something you'd like me to talk about on Sunday, because I'm completely drawing a blank. It's just need more light. Is that better or worse? I guess I should just be prettier. Anyway, this Saturday is Diwali, Diwali, which is a big holiday for Indian people, largely Hindus, but sort of culturally Indian stuff. I have a meditation student who's an Indian. He's a physician who lives in another state. And we were talking about Diwali last year, I think it was. And he said, seems like every culture has some sort of a major holiday around this time of year. And I'm not sure that that's the case. Yeah, I don't know, that's worse. That's better. I'm not sure that that's the case, but it's got to be pretty close. In fact, at school, at Stetson, we kind of started talking about it as the sort of the season of light, because with Diwali, Yule, Hanukkah, Bodhi Day, Christmas, and other holidays and that, all of them, one way or another, are based on these themes of sort of good versus evil, light versus dark, the energies of wisdom and compassion versus the forces of selfishness and ignorance. And so if you think about it, religion and cultural traditions more generally tend to have somewhere at their heart the question of good and evil. What's good, what's evil? We don't necessarily agree on the definitions. In Buddhism, it's evil if it leads back to death. It leads back to death if it leads to birth. So if it leads to clinging, or it leads to the suffering of others or whatever, then, we sort of define it as evil, which is, our word, not the Buddha's word. The Buddha, spoke a different language. And if it's good, like I talked about in the meditation, if it leads to peace and happiness, it's good. And not just peace and happiness for me, but peace and happiness in general. If it leads to sorrow and suffering, not so much, right? So Diwali is kind of a nice example of that. It's not my tradition by any means, but I think it's kind of cool. I like it as a holiday. There are Buddhists in the world who celebrate it. There's probably Buddhists whose cultures are connected to Indian culture. I don't know any personally who celebrate it, but I reading about it in the past and stuff. There, Indian Buddhists and Himalayan Buddhists in some areas would celebrate it. The pronunciation, by the way, in a lot of these languages, like Pali, for example, the W is pronounced sort of like a V, sort of like the W in Hawaii, right? It's kind of a W, kind of a V. But the tradition involves decorating the home in kind of festive colors, lots of lights and candles and stuff like that. There's special food and treats and stuff that are associated with the holidays. So I think it's a cool festival. I'm glad to see that it started to get kind of woven into our cultural fabric. And it's based on a rich mythology. And Buddhism, coming from India, shares a lot of the same mythology from the Brahmanistic religion. And so, it's not a bad idea to be slightly informed by these things, although it's not particularly important to your practice. But, it's kind of nice to have a cultural context for them. So in this particular tradition, there was a king, Bali, and the gods, and it's about how they came into dominion over the earth. So King Bali was a generous ruler, but he was very ambitious. And the gods worried that he was going to become too powerful and too corrupt. Again, he was a good guy. He was generous, he was good to people, but he really liked to be in charge. And so the gods were worried about this tendency of his to want to be, to control a lot of stuff. And so they asked Vishnu, who is one of Hinduism's main deities, to do something to bring his power under control. And so Vishnu came to earth in the form of a dwarf dressed as a priest. So he was a dwarf, a little person who was a priest. And he approached King Bali and said, King Bali, you are the ruler of the three worlds, the earth, the world above the skies, and the underworld. Would you give me the space that I could cover with 3 strides? And King Bali laughed and said, well, surely this little guy couldn't cover much ground. And so he agreed. And so at this point, the dwarf changes into Vishnu, and his 3 strides covers the earth, the skies, and the entire universe. And so now he's in charge. And so he sends King Bali to the underworld. So that's kind of the basic story. But more specifically, Diwali commemorates the epic story of the Ramayana. If you've ever had any interest in Indian culture or tradition, I mean, this is kind of the novel, the big story that contains a lot of this mythology. It's the legend of Lord Rama's battle with the demon Ravana. Rama, by the way, is an incarnation of Vishnu. Anyway, Lord Rama is married to Sita, who is an incarnation of Lakshmi, and I'll talk more about her in a little bit. And as the story begins, Rama has been cast out of his rightful kingdom and is living in a forest with Sita. Well, this demon falls in love with Sita and he abducts her from the forest, and this precipitates this big battle with Rama. And eventually Rama prevails and is able to return to his kingdom. And so as Rama and Sita return home, the people light candles to help guide them through the darkness back to their homes. And so a big part of the Diwali festival, and the reason it's called the Festival of Light, is that people light candles and other lights and things like that as one of the main observations. And so the 3rd day of Diwali is generally considered the most important part of the festival, which is several days long. And that day is devoted to the worship of the goddess Lakshmi. Lakshmi is the consort of the god Vishnu. I'm not going to test you on all these names. Don't worry about this. But she's a really popular goddess in Hindu mythology and is considered the goddess of wealth and purity and success. It's kind of interesting to think of those three things being together: wealth, success, and purity, because the purity doesn't fit in there very well in a lot of cultures. But, different cultures have different ways of understanding what we mean by these things. And so Hindus believe that Lakshmi lives where diligence, virtue, and courage exist, but that when those qualities are no longer apparent, she will leave. And so if one worships her sincerely and without greed, they will bless them with good fortune. So her observance falls on a new moon day. So that night is especially dark. And so it's an auspicious time to bring light into the darkness. So the new moon right around now would be her day. And the faithful believe that on that night she walks through the fields and avenues to bestow blessings on humanity. And so the lamps that light up the night symbolize the light of knowledge dawning on humanity as good overcomes evil. And that's where this story becomes kind of universal. This whole idea that lighting up the darkness, represents wisdom and goodness dawning on humanity and bringing us out of the darkness. So things like the lighting of the Yule log, is a really good example of that same kind of thing. And it comes from, well, I'll talk about the Yule log when we get a little closer, maybe I'll talk about that one. But, it really does symbolize kind of the end of a cycle of darkness and moving into light. Sikhs and Jains also celebrate Diwali. Sikhs acknowledge it as the return of the sixth of their 10 gurus, who came out of captivity. He had fought against oppression, and was imprisoned. This was in 1612 at the age of 17. And then when he was 19, he managed to get released and secure the release of 52 other prisoners. And so that's sort of the bringing, that release from the darkness of oppression into the light of freedom. It's a very important Jain festival. The Jains, I've talked about them a couple of times on the Thursday night calls when we're talking about the Dhammapada. There's a couple of references to Jain ascetics in the Dhammapada. They were contemporaries of the Buddha, or one of their important figures was a contemporary of the Buddha. And it celebrates, the Jains use Diwali to celebrate the parinirvana, passing away into nirvana, of Lord Mahavira, who established the religion. And Mahavira is the one who's a contemporary of the Buddha. And when you read the story about how he became enlightened, it was a very similar kind of story. It's interesting. Those mythologies, which it doesn't mean they're not true, but they're these sort of spiritual stories that provide a foundation for a spiritual tradition, sometimes are very similar. So thinking about this reminded me of something that Reverend Kubose said once, a long time ago. This was, 2008 or 9 or whenever, when I was going through the Bright Dawn program the seminary program, if you will. And he was talking about this conversation that he'd had with a child. And I think this child was a relative, a nephew or something like that. But this youngster had noticed that when he went into his bedroom at night, that when, you first turned the lights out, it was very dark. And that as his eyes got used to that, he could start to see some of the things in his room. And he was talking about that. And he goes, there's quite a bit of light in the darkness. And I think that's a good metaphor for the spiritual journey. And I think it's also something we can remind ourselves of at time when we're going through times of darkness personally or as a society. I had a real dark night of the soul last night. I really did. Woke up at like 2:30 in the morning, worried about my son and worried about, I'd just been having stress dreams. I had a dream that it was raining and there was rain coming in through the roof. it's a new roof, or relatively new roof, and it's got a lifetime warranty. So, but in my dream, this was a big problem. And, worried about the government and been thinking about traveling, but then I'm worried about the infection rates and all that kind of stuff. And my mind, in my dreams, was just working on this a lot. And I laid awake for quite a while, trying to settle these things down and going, and then I realized, again, I have to remind myself these things once in a while, that there is a lot of light in the darkness. There are a lot of good people doing a lot of good things, and we'll learn a lot from this. And, as complicated as things get, I mean, there's some upsides to this time. Some of the people here tonight probably couldn't be here if we were still meeting at the UU church, right? So there's quite a bit of light in the darkness once you look into it, right? And so often we don't begin to progress along a path of practice until we realize that we're in the darkness, and we realize that there's light available to us, the light of hope, the light of goodwill, the light of wisdom. So we think back to these myths of Diwali and the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. We see that progress on the spiritual path tends to arise out of pain. The Buddha realized that his life and the life of his loved ones did or would contain suffering, and he was looking for a way to transcend that. And the answer to that question was the awakening that he experienced after several years of practice. And we refer to that awakening literally as enlightenment, bringing light to the darkness of human experience. So here's how he talked about that. He said, before my enlightenment, being subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, and suffering, I sought what was subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, and suffering. And then I considered thus, why should I seek that which is subject to this? Having understood the danger in what is subject to arising, what if I seek instead the supreme security from bondage, nirvana? And at that moment of enlightenment, as after years of seeking, as he sat down beneath a tree and found that moment, at this moment of enlightenment, the morning star rose to herald the end of 7 nights of meditation. He realized the truth of arising and cessation. And he said, when this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. And as this grew clear, ardent, absorbed, he stood, routing the dark troops of Mara like the sun that lights up the sky. Like the sun that lights up the sky. So these phrases, when this is, that isn't, that is, when this isn't, that isn't, from the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. That's often used kind of as an explanation of the idea of interdependence. That's not really what that means. What that means is he recognized the cause of coming and going. And that if you could stop that cause, you would stop the coming and going. And that stopping the coming and going would be liberation, for freedom, nirvana. So, we all know that we experience seasonal changes. Days grow shorter, nights grow long. That's why I'm fooling with the light in here all of a sudden. Well, partly because, daylight savings time ended. And so the change was rather abrupt because of that change in 1 hour change. But, it wasn't that long ago that it was kind of bright in here. We had plenty of daylight, 7 o'clock at night. Now it's dark outside. We even know on some level that we wouldn't enjoy the cooling of fall weather if it weren't a relief from the heat of summer. And we wouldn't enjoy the beauty of a sunrise over the ocean if it weren't from the night from which it emerges, right? When we come to our spiritual and emotional lives, though, we often find it difficult to accept the periods of darkness that come in between our periods of joy and contentment. But they're natural cycles. Night and day Change in seasons, those are the consequences of how the planet moves relative to the sun. And joys and sorrows, sickness and health, birth and death, those are natural consequences of being born human. And so the key to happiness and spiritual peace is really to accept and skillfully make use of the darkness that comes into our lives. And it's hard. I know it's hard. It's hard for me too. But we all have this ability to wake up, the Buddha nature. This is an abstraction. You can think about Buddha nature all you want to, but think about it as meaning really this possibility of awakening that comes about because of our fundamental goodness. All people possess that potential, even if it's buried under a lot of misunderstanding. And if you've planted seeds in the past that have ripened in a way that brought you here today, here being, virtually with me listening to this, then that's because you planted seeds in the past. It made it possible for you to love others, for you to do good and charitable things, for you to recognize the sacredness of the present moment. Some seeds don't sprout unless you put them in the ground when it's warm and sunny, and then they sit through a period of darkness and coldness, and then they come out in the light. And the seed of Buddha nature, I think, tends to need that period of darkness. I doubt, I've said this a bunch of times before, I've never had anyone say that they started a spiritual path because things were going really well. It always comes out of a time when it's dark and they see that there's a light available, or they think maybe there's a glimmer of something there, and they want to draw closer to that. So fortunately, we do embody this light ourselves. If you're here, if you're listening to me, not because there's anything special about me, but because there's something that makes you aware of this awakening, okay? Makes you aware of this possibility. And there's one of my favorite Zen koans really illustrates this. And I know a bunch of you have heard me say it before, but I'll repeat it again. It's the story of Tokusan. And he had heard about Zen, and he was a scholar. He was a scholar of the Diamond Sutra. And some of the things that he had heard Zen said seemed blasphemous to him, or at least disrespectful toward what he considered to be Buddhism. And so he decided that he would go to the part of the country where Zen was taking hold, and he'd find some of these Zen guys and he'd straighten them out. And so he was carrying with him this big pack on his back that were full of his notes and commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. Diamond Sutra, by the way, is one of the key texts in Mahayana Buddhism. That's the basis of, generally speaking, you could say it's the basis of much of Tantric Buddhism is based on the Diamond Sutra. And there's versions of it out there if you ever want to read it. Anyway, he happened to stop at a village for refreshments. And this old woman in the tea shop there asked him, "What is in that heavy pack you're carrying?" And Tokusan says, "This is the commentary that I've made on the Diamond Sutra through many years of hard work." And she says, "Oh, I read that sutra." She says, "The Diamond Sutra says the past mind cannot be held, the present mind cannot be held, the future mind cannot be held. You've asked for tea and refreshments. Which mind do you propose to refresh with them?" Well, Tokusan was quite flummoxed by this and realized that she must be one of these Zen Buddhists he'd heard about. And so he asked if she knew any good teacher in the area. And she referred him to Rutan, whose monastery was about 5 miles away. So he thanked her, and he went to see this Zen master, who was very patiently answered all of his questions, received him very graciously. They sat and talked well into the night. And after several hours, the teacher said, "Look, it's getting late. Why don't you retire?" And he said, "Don't go all the way back down to the village. You can just stay here at the monastery." And so Tokusan bowed, agreed, and they went to go out, and they opened the screen to step out into the dark. It was very dark outside. And so the master offered him a candle to light his way. But just as he took it and stepped out into the darkness, he leaned over and blew it out. And so at that instant, he was plunged into darkness, but also at that instant, he was enlightened. And the next day, he showed up at the lecture hall, and he went up to in front of the lecture hall, in front of all the monks, and he burned his commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. And he said, however abstruse the teachings are in comparison with enlightenment, they are like a single hair to the great sky. However profound all the knowledge of the world may be, compared to enlightenment, it's like one drop in the great ocean. And in his commentaries on the story, Zen Master Muman says, 100 hearings cannot surpass one seeing. So I hope that having thought about this idea of bringing light to the darkness, that you'll see that for yourself. Look for the light in the dark. Don't just listen to me talk about it. That won't do you much good. All right. So thank you. That's really all I had for you tonight. Are there any questions or comments? All right. Well, let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like for me to talk about on Sunday, because I've been. Oh, you're welcome. I've been. You're welcome. I've been pondering that question. Such a weird time. A lot to talk about, but I don't want to wear everybody out talking about what you're already thinking about all the time. You know what I mean? But anyway, thank you for being here. And I look forward to seeing some of you on Thursday. Oh, and by the way, in case I forget, or those of you who don't know already, starting Monday the 23rd, we'll do a workshop on Loving Heart, Peaceful Mind. The workbook, if you want information about that, you can email me or message me from here or whatever, and I'll tell you about that. Costs the same thing that these do, right? And I can give you the PDF to the book, so you don't even have to buy that. But anyway, look forward to seeing you tomorrow night, those of you who come to Zoom. And otherwise, I'll be talking to you Sunday from White Sands. So have a good evening.